funds?
Well, I thank you for that question, and I would like to perhaps explore with you a little further as to exactly which grants you were talking about. I believe
the $1 billion in congressionally directed federal grants that have been cut.
And as I said, I would like to.
What happens when a cabinet secretary is confronted with billions in education cuts and can't give a straight answer? Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici put Linda McMahon on the spot, demanding to know why congressionally approved funds were cut despite McMahon previously promising to follow the law. Then Bonamici delivered the line that brought the exchange into sharp focus: if you can't do that, you shouldn't be in this job.
Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McMahon, on February 13th, during your confirmation hearing, Senator Murray asked you, if confirmed, do you commit to getting every dollar we have invested in our students and our schools out to them? And you replied, well, the appropriated dollars and those monies that are passed by Congress, yes. And Senator also Brooks asked you whether you would support any directive from the president to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, and you responded, if they have been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated. Yet you stood by as Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency froze or terminated more than $1 billion in congressionally directed federal grants at the Department of Education, and you've made no attempts to reinstate those funds. So Secretary McMahon, were you not being truthful when you were testified in the Senate? And if you were being truthful, what is your plan to immediately reinstate these funds?
Well, I thank you for that question, and I would like to perhaps explore with you a little further as to exactly which grants you were talking about. I believe
the $1 billion in congressionally directed federal grants that have been cut.
And as I said, I would like to work with you and to understand exactly which grants you're talking about. I can also tell you that as part of my testimony
Madam Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time because the question is, congressionally directed funds have been cut. What are you doing to reinstate those funds?
And I also said in that testimony that we would abide by the law, and that's exactly what we will do.
Well, that would be to reinstate the funds. And I know you have this so-called simplified funding program that consolidates programs, for including Title 4A, which I always lead the appropriations letter for. But overall, this consolidation, so-called consolidation, leads to a $4.5 billion cut. So that makes your statement untruthful if you're not doing anything to restore those funds. With regard to Title 4A, can you name one of the major categories in Title 4A where cuts will lead to a well-rounded education or world-class education, as you state?
Let me respond to one other thing that you asked before. And when you were talking about the cuts of $4.5 billion, along with that cut goes a great reduction in the cost of regulatory compliance.
Madam Secretary, I need to reclaim my time because I want you to answer the question about which category in 4A where cutting will lead to a world-class education.
I'm certainly going to answer your question, but also I think it's important for this committee and for taxpayers to understand that when we cut red tape for regulations—
I understand, Madam Secretary. I have to reclaim my time because you're not answering my question.
Well, I'm trying to answer your question.
The cuts have happened, and as Secretary of Education, your job is to faithfully execute the law.
Correct.
And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be in this job. I have another question for you. Since you've been in office, you've violated or stated your intention to violate several major federal laws that have been enacted by Congress. And one of them I want to talk about is the Education Sciences Reform Act. So that's what I'll focus on. Congress enacted the law more than 20 years ago and created the Institute of Education Sciences. IES provides evidence-based data to improve student outcomes and support teachers. But the Trump administration unilaterally canceled more than $900 million in IES grant funding and reduced IES staff from 175 to fewer than 20 employees, a reduction of about 90%. So Secretary McMahon, what statute authorizes you to unilaterally dismantle an office Congress created?
What we have done to the benefit of those grants is to, well, first of all, let me say that there are a lot of contracts that are done in IES. So none of those contracted services have been affected. And also, what is part of IES and the funding you're talking about are for NAEP, and for the NAEP program is already in place for the next 5 years. However, we did renegotiate that contract and save $540 billion, I think.
And you can do that with fewer than 20 employees, is what you're saying?
We are doing it because we are able to continue doing what we do because the contracted services which are still in place have not been affected.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you can meet the statutory obligations without money or adequate staff. What do the NAEP scores show when disaggregated by income, by the way?
I beg your pardon?
What do the NAEP scores show when disaggregated by income?
When disaggregate, I don't
By
understand the
income.
question.
Okay, well, maybe you should look at the NAEP scores, because what they say, you and the chairman and a lot of members of this committee use the NAEP scores to talk about how education is doing. What we really need to look at is
you
how we
talking about-
address low-income students.
Oh, okay,
because-
you're talking about performance and achievement gaps. Okay, I get it now.
Yes.
Okay. Well, NAEP scores, I think, continually show what we all know to be true, I think. I've looked at it in my state of Connecticut. It's one of the things that first got me into government. I looked at the achievement gaps, and that's what I wanted to make sure that we were servicing.
And as my time expires, Madam Secretary, what they show is that we need to have investments to help our low-income students succeed, and you are cutting those investments. And I ran for Congress because I wanted to make public education better, but not just for a few, not just those who are worthy of private dollars, and not just those in wealthy neighborhoods, but every single student. As Secretary of Education, I hope you would have the same goal.
I
yield
do,
back.
and thank you.
One of the most tense moments of the hearing came when Representative Suzanne Bonamici confronted Education Secretary Linda McMahon over billions of dollars in education funding and whether the Trump administration was following the laws passed by Congress. Bonamici began by reminding McMahon of something she had said during her confirmation hearing. McMahon had indicated that if Congress appropriated money for education programs, those funds should be distributed. But Bonamici argued that the administration's actions told a very different story. She pointed to more than $1 billion in congressionally directed education grants that had been frozen or terminated. Her question to McMahon was direct: if those funds were appropriated by Congress, what was the Secretary doing to restore them? McMahon attempted to ask which specific grants Bonamici was referring to, but Bonamici wasn't having it. She reclaimed her time and returned to the central issue. Congress had directed the funding, and she wanted to know what McMahon was doing to carry out that mandate. The exchange became even more contentious when Bonamici brought up the administration's proposed consolidation of education programs. She argued that the changes represented billions of dollars in cuts and challenged McMahon to explain how those reductions would produce a better education system. McMahon began discussing reductions in regulatory costs and what she described as efforts to reduce red tape. But Bonamici repeatedly brought the conversation back to the question she wanted answered. And then came the moment that defined the exchange. Bonamici reminded McMahon that, as Education Secretary, her responsibility was to faithfully execute federal law. Then she delivered the bluntest line of the exchange. "If you can't do that, you shouldn't be in this job." The confrontation didn't end there. Bonamici moved on to the Institute of Education Sciences, an agency created by Congress to provide research and evidence about what works in education. She pointed to the administration's cancellation of hundreds of millions of dollars in IES-related grants and a dramatic reduction in staffing. Bonamici questioned how an agency created by Congress could fulfill its statutory responsibilities after losing both funding and personnel. McMahon defended the changes by arguing that contracted services remained in place and that the department had renegotiated certain contracts. But Bonamici challenged whether an agency could realistically meet its legal obligations with dramatically fewer employees and reduced resources. The questioning then shifted to educational achievement gaps. Bonamici argued that standardized assessment data show that more investment is needed to help students from low-income communities succeed. Her broader argument was that federal education policy should not simply benefit wealthy districts or students with access to private resources. She closed with a message about equal opportunity. Public education should work for every student, not just those living in wealthy neighborhoods. The larger issue behind Bonamici's questioning was accountability. Her argument was essentially that Congress writes and funds federal education programs, and the executive branch cannot simply ignore those decisions when implementing policy. For Bonamici, the hearing wasn't just about individual grant programs. It was about whether the Education Department was honoring congressional authority and protecting the resources intended for America's students. And that's what made the exchange so powerful. She wasn't simply criticizing cuts, she was challenging McMahon to explain whether the administration was actually following the law.